first of all, I am a career researcher, currently based in Dallas, Texas, but I didn't start here. But I'm a career researcher, client side and agency side. Today, I work for Market Vision. I'm vice president there. I'm also involved in a company called Insight Sutras as a board member and an advisor. It's based in India. But as you already alluded to, I am the host and creator of the Rock and Roll Research Podcast, which I've been doing for the last few years. We've had about 115 guests, over 15,000 downloads. I'm certain that everybody on this call knows a number of people who have been guests. There are people on this podcast. I'm looking at you, Frankie and Sue, who have been guests on the Rock and Roll Research Podcast. Really good ones, so I appreciate that very much. You can follow us on LinkedIn. I think I was the first person on the call, so I was the first to post my LinkedIn information. Connect with me. Follow the podcast on LinkedIn. You can find us on YouTube, your favorite podcast station, all that good stuff. So the interesting thing about the podcast is I've learned so much talking to 115 researchers. It's very biographical. And I've learned a lot about people individually, but also kind of from a meta perspective. I've been able to draw some bigger insights about researchers and what makes them tick. And that part is really, really cool. So one thing that I've picked up in exploring all of these origin stories of researchers is that there's often something in their origin story or something in their passions outside of work that that deeply affects their decision to become a market researcher or to stay in market research, or their perspective as a researcher. And I think that's a really interesting thing, because if you think about, say, a different discipline like accounting, right? Accounting is accounting. And if you bring a totally different perspective and you get too creative, you might wind up in jail. But when it comes to insights and research, the more creativity, the better. When we have lots of different diverse perspectives, diversity of thought, different backgrounds, all that kind of stuff, we can help get closer to the truth. And so we each bring our own unique perspective to the table. And it's been really a lot of fun and interesting to explore that with the guests that I've had on the podcast. So let me give you a couple of examples. There are a few that stand out to me. If anybody knows this guy called Ben Depke in Cincinnati, he's got a company called IX. It's like a qualitative strategy firm. Ben he had this really unconventional upbringing. He was episode 57, by the way. He had this really unconventional upbringing, growing up on a farm, and totally different, like no rules kind of thing, and you can draw a very clear line from how he grew up and how he was brought up to think and how he approaches insights and research, which is totally different than anybody I've met in the industry. He eschews all rules and starts from nothing and builds up to something that might be very different from what any of us might create. And I think that that's really interesting. I could seriously sit down and talk to Ben for days. A couple of others that come to mind, there was Leona Notch. She was episode 64. She works for Intel. She's an insights person there. This is her second career. Her first career was as a professional violinist on Broadway and elsewhere. And you can just imagine the kind of discipline that it would require to become a professional violinist on Broadway. And she applies that same discipline to her insights career. And so it's interesting. She thinks differently about it. There's someone else like that too. There was Jenny Finnerty, was episode number 51. She was as close to being an Olympic athlete in artistic swimming. Her twin sister made the team. She did not, because she had a late injury before those decisions were made. But again, looking good, Matt O'Mara, I must say in the comments. But that discipline that she applied to artistic swimming is really, like, when you work with her, which I have, in Insights, you can really see that come across. So we bring our own perspective to the table based on, what we were interested in before, what we did before, what we do in parallel to Insights. And it's really interesting to explore that. So I started to interrogate myself, share a little bit about myself, and then I think we'll all share about ourselves in the breakouts after this. But just to set the stage, so me, where does my perspective and insights come from? Well, I can tell you, growing up, I was on this relentless search for the truth. I was interested in a couple of things: math, music, and sports. That was it, really. And I thought that math was the vehicle for finding truth. that vehicle that was shattered by something called Gödel's proof. Once I discovered that, it's a totally separate discussion. But anyway, so I thought that truth could be found in the ever more complex. You just have to keep digging. It's not self-evident. If it was easy, everybody would find the truth, but it's not. So you have to keep digging. And so that manifested in a couple of ways in my life. One was music. My interest in music was like my first passion was the band Rush. Why? Because it was so complicated. All these time signatures, incredibly complex, difficult to play. That must be closer to truth, right? And then came Slayer, which is a little bit different, but still just this complicated mixture of fury and all that kind of thing. So that's what I was into. And then also it was like the early days, like if you've seen the movie Moneyball or read the book, it was pre-Moneyball, and I was really interested because there were these writers, in particular this guy named Bill James, who was all of a sudden taking this treasure trove of data and baseball statistics, analyzing in ways no one had ever done before, and uncovering these really provocative truths that went against conventional wisdom that was developed by all these old coaches and stuff that just know the game. They've been around the game. And so I was super interested and fascinated in that. So the truth is in the data, right? So I was a hardcore quant when I started my career. And that lasted for quite some time. But over time, I started to realize, wow, working with this qualitative stuff, it creates these insights that you just can't find in quant. There's some whys behind it, and there's this story behind a narrative that's really intriguing. And so over time, I became much more open and interested in qual. In parallel, I became much interested in very simple music that made me feel a certain way. So I got really into punk rock. That's 4/4 all the time, nothing complicated, but it's catchy and it makes me happy. So that's all that matters, right?